All right. Hey guys. Hope everything is working well. So I just want to make sure that you can hear both of us and see both of us before I continue. So just let me know.
Hey, everybody in chat.
Uh, I'm just waiting for it to, there we go. Okay, awesome. 5 by 5.
In chat.
So let me just turn down my volume here. And so obviously we have an awesome guest tonight, Prepping with Sarge. I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate you, and I've been enjoying your content. I think it's really important what you're doing for helping people with anxiety, and obviously we're going to talk a lot about that and some other stuff tonight. I see a lot of people in chat that I already know, so hello to everybody. I'm glad we have a lot of mutual friends. For those who don't know me, I have two channels actually. My main channel is Prepping with Sarge, where we talk a lot about preparedness. I have about 100 foraging videos on there, about 100 gardening videos on there. I do a lot of product reviews and things like that. And then my secondary channel is more of a labor of love that I get to when I have free time to do it. It's called the Official Mental Health Matters channel. And yes, it's not dead. I know it probably looks like, wow, he hasn't uploaded here in a while. It's unfortunately I just time is the issue. If I had more time, I would upload to it more often. But it's one that when I get the time, I film a video and put it up there, and it's going to continue to have stuff on there about like panic attacks and sleep and trauma and all kinds of cool stuff. And it's not one that I'm worried about monetizing or anything like that. It's just trying to get some information out there for people. So glad to be here. I've been in the field for over 25 years, basically started being a therapist when the dinosaurs were still walking on the earth. And I'll take as many questions as we can and answer to the best of my ability. If there's an area that I don't have good expertise in, I'll just say I just don't know a lot about that, or I don't work with that population that much.
Awesome. I honestly didn't know you had a second channel. That's really great to know. My internet like blinked out for a second or so. Would you mind just repeating the name of that?
Oh, the second channel is the Official Mental Health Matters channel. And you have to
Okay.
put the official in front of it because there's several other mental health matters channel. I am the official mental health matters channel.
Got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. So
Thank
I
you.
just, yeah. So I'm just going to say a big hello to everybody tonight. And normally I start with my whole, I am not a doctor, so please don't listen to me. But we actually have a real life therapist tonight. So you might want to listen to him.
I'll do the best that I can. I'll try to help as many people as I can.
Awesome. I've linked I've linked his let me try this one more time. I've linked his channel in my description, but if one of the mods wouldn't mind putting it up there, and so you guys should definitely all go check out his channel. He's got an awesome one. So all right, so if you guys have questions and such, let's get into it. I don't really have a topic tonight. I figured, hey, let's cause a little more anxiety on my part and just go with it. So that's what we're doing. So I figured, Sarge would kind of maybe take the lead a little bit.
Sure.
Putting him
So,
on the spot.
yeah. So, I welcome any questions, especially medications, treatments, things like that. I'll speak to everything that I have knowledge about. And thank you. I see a couple people appreciate those comments. So let me talk a little bit first about, because I was just on Pistol Packing Pilot's channel earlier this week talking about a lot of the same stuff. And I don't necessarily want to steer this in this direction, but just to kind of get us started, there's been so many changes since I started in this field, things that I think people should probably be aware of, and why it can get so hard to access services, especially for a new patient, and how we got to this place. So when I started in the field back in the 90s, there was the general standard for clinicians was about 32, maybe, like you had some people that were doing maybe 40, but 40 would be considered a lot of either patients or families, right, that they were working with. And that was generally considered like the standard, and that most experts in the field said we really probably shouldn't exceed this. This is, you go beyond 40 and it starts getting, really, they said 30. You go beyond 30 and it starts getting really hard to maintain the appropriate quality of care. And we are in a place now where most of the clinicians that I work with and that I know of, whether it be in the public sector or in private practice, are looking at upwards of 75 plus. And I know people who have many, many more cases than that. So what happens when you do that? Well, number one, you're probably not gonna be able to see your therapist every week. That's just probably not going to happen in a lot of cases. The accessibility of your therapist is going to be very, very limited. So if you have questions in between appointments, or you need to communicate with a therapist to tell your doctor that you're having side effects and things like that, there's going to be probably some lag time to being able to have them see that message, get the message to the doctor, wait for the doctor to respond, because the doctor's caseloads have gone up significantly too. Get that message back and then relay it to the patient. So if people in the field, if patients are out there and they're frustrated with where things are with mental health, we share that frustration. Believe me, it's not good where things are at. So how did we get here? Well, unfortunately, we've had so many people leave the field, and we've not done a great job of recruiting people into the field. It's not one of the highest paying professions. And if you look at this house behind me, you're probably like, what are you talking about? You look like you're doing pretty good. This is a green screen. That's not my house. Not to say that I'm like dirt poor, but like, it's not a high paying profession compared to other professions like, cybersecurity or accountant, or certainly not doctor or lawyer. Like it's way below that. It's probably more similar to like a teacher's salary or a police officer's salary. We're in that ballpark. So that makes it hard to recruit. There's a long process from when you graduate to actually getting licensed independently. So just to give people an idea on that. So let's say that you went to school for your bachelor's degree. Well, there's limitations to what you could actually even do with your bachelor's degree, and say if you went psychology or social work or counseling, something like that. So most people are to really do practice, they're going to have to go on for their master's. So you're talking about another 2 years and a lot of money, school loans, things like that. And then even post graduating from that, you have to initially pass one test to basically says that you're competent to practice at that level. And it's not an easy test. It's maybe slightly less hard than the bar. It's a pretty difficult test. You can't just like go into it. You have to do a lot of studying and prepping for that. And then you're not done yet. Then you have to train for 2 years under somebody like myself, who's been in the field for a while, who's independently licensed. And we monitor those people, give them feedback. We kind of, what are you working on with these patients? What approaches are you taking? We assess the risk of like, okay, is there anything going on with this that this person's like not ready to be a therapist, and things like that. So, and I actually do some of that on the side. It's one of my side jobs, is I help people get to that license level. So then after 2 years of that, then they can take the next test, which is even harder. And a lot of people don't pass this test. So now you've done 6 years of college. You've taken one test, and you've trained under somebody else who, by the way, you have to pay for that usually in most cases. So you've trained under somebody else for 2 years. So you're into this for a lot of time and a lot of money. And if you don't pass that test, you can't practice independently. So there's huge risks to it. And a lot of people just aren't going into the field. We've made it really, really challenging. There's too many barriers to get to that level. So, and then you do all that, and the pay's not great. So our recruitment's been horrible. We've lost a lot of our, veteran clinicians, either through retirement or things like the pandemic. People were like, I'm out. I don't want to do this. Things like dealing with managed care. A lot of the senior clinicians were like, I'm not dealing with this managed care crap. I'm out. And so that's why when you call for an appointment for your kid, they're telling you need 6 months. You have to wait 6 months to get in. It's not okay. I don't agree with any of this. I think we're in a really sorry state. And I apologize to everybody out there who's got loved ones that you're trying to get help for. We're doing what we can from inside to like push for change, and change is going to involve things like, hey, we got to put more money into this. We got to make it so that this is actually worthwhile for people to go through all these steps. And other things too, like, okay, managed care probably needs to back off a little bit and kind of let us do our job. things like that. So this is why we're in the state that we're in. So if you've been out there trying to find services for your family, your loved one, yourself, and they're telling you it's a 6-month wait, it's bad, guys. I'm sorry. I'm sad about it.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah.
I remember trying to make a couple of appointments, maybe, and I mean, it was still a few years back, maybe, 8-ish years ago, and it was really, we had a hard time. A lot of them were, no new patients, no new patients.
Yeah.
And then when somebody is really in need of it, and they're like, "Sorry, no new patients," and I think I called for almost 2 days straight before I found somebody who would take us.
Yeah.
And I said, we need somebody like right now, and I think we got in within 3 or 4 days or something. Finally, like as an emergency,
Mhm.
and I remember they. Am I blinking out? I
I
am.
got you. I can hear you.
The where was I going with this?
About trying to get into
Yeah,
services and how long it took.
The cancellation. You had to sign a cancellation thing. If you canceled within like 72 hours, you had like 3 days, and
Yeah.
they were like, if you cancel within 72 hours, we're still charging you. And I was like, 3 days later? What? Like, wow, that's
Yeah.
insane. And they're like, and no, no, oh, no problem. I think I am too. But you're on the other side of the world from me. I can see me blinking in and out. And about 15 minutes ago, I lost my whole internet there for a second. Probably not 15 minutes, just
Oh.
not good at time. But do you think, I mean, have you noticed that, especially kids, it's growing more and more, we just have so many kids with issues,
Yeah.
anxiety, depression, OCD. I've just noticed, like back in the day, and even when my older son was little, and I mean, he's 31 now, but even back when he was, younger, we didn't see this kind of insane. And I just wonder, what does it have to do with the phone,
Yeah.
social media, what they're
Yes.
eating? Is it
Yeah.
more medication? Like what is this?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking like we need to fix that before we, and then the healthcare crisis like you have, on the other side where you can't get anybody would be a lot more manageable, and
Yeah.
people who need it could get in.
You're 100% right. There is a rise in uh so let me say here that my opinions are my own. I don't necessarily speak for the field. I don't speak necessarily for people my peers that I work with. Some would probably disagree with some of the things I'm going to say tonight, and that's okay. I'm going to give you my opinion, and I'm going to stand in my truth. But and I'm also at the point in my career where I'm tired of sitting down and shutting up, and I'm going to blow the whistle on some stuff. So my opinion is that social media is a huge factor in the rise in teenage depression and teenage, we can't say the S word because YouTube hates it, so we'll say self-harm or unaliving yourself, right? The If you were to look at the correlation between when the statistics for teen self-harm started to take that like rise in like frequency and prevalence, it directly correlates with social media, with the rise of social media. And kids are being raised on, much too young. So brain development doesn't even complete until you're about 25 years old, right? So there's the parts of the brain that are involved with decision making skills are like right here, it's your prefrontal cortex,
Oh,
and
funny.
that's not even fully developed until you're hitting your like early 20s. So we're giving kids phones, access to information that they are not ready for, and their innocence is stolen much sooner than previous generations, right? So to use an example here, growing up in the 70s and 80s, occasionally a boy in the neighborhood would find one of his dad's or his uncle's Playboys or whatever, right? And they would kind of like sneak that out and, ooh, we get to see naked ladies, right? And that might have happened. But even like Playboy in the 70s and 80s wasn't like what I would consider graphic porn. It was artistic, they're usually just solo images of a woman posing, that kind of thing. compared to what the kids are seeing now, which is like off the wall bonkers, any kind of fetish or sexual thing that anybody could possibly imagine. And they're seeing it much younger, right? Like 6, 7 year olds, because it's so easy to, you can even stumble across these things, right? If you're on Facebook, how many people have accidentally seen like hardcore pornography just by like scrolling through things, and it's like somebody's put that there, and it takes a little while for Facebook to say, oh, that probably doesn't belong out there, and then they'll take it down. So it's easier for the kids to see this stuff. That's a factor. You've got TikTok, and we'll get back to Snapchat here in a second, because Snapchat's one of the ones that I think is one of the biggest problems that parents should be aware of. But TikTok, you've got the algorithm is pushing content that encourages eating disorders for young girls and self-harm stunts for young boys. I was about to say, we did stunts in the 70s and 80s. Who could climb the highest in the tree, who could jump over this thing, but it's just so much more prevalent and more high risk than anything that's ever happened. And again, they're accessing this stuff so early when there's no prefrontal cortex development, and the decision-making skills aren't there. Snapchat, you've got Snapchat is basically a breeding ground for anybody who's a predator. These kids go on there and they think, oh, I can send an image to somebody and it'll disappear. What is it, like 30 seconds or 7 seconds? Or I don't know. But they don't. Yeah, so I don't either. But the kids that I work with tell me about it. And basically, they think because the image disappears that it's not going to stay permanently out there on the internet. But all it takes is you hold one camera on top of the other and you Snapchat, or if it's on your computer, you hold your phone up and you're taking a picture of what's on your screen from Snapchat. And so there's no such thing as like an image that disappears. It's out there. And so these kids, now I'm talking more like middle school and up, are sending each other. And again, let's be honest, like when I started dating and I was into girls and all this other stuff, right? Like I probably would have been doing some of this stuff too, where they're like asking for pictures from their girlfriends and things like that. But then it's getting out there, right? You know what I mean? I don't want to get too graphic here, but like that stuff's getting out there. And so you've got predators out there who know this, and they create a fake account and they pretend they're a teenager and they befriend these kids, and it's become a grooming ground. It's really sick. And the police are aware of this, because I work with a lot of law enforcement as part of my job. Police are aware of this, and they do their best to catch these predators. But sometimes it's hard, because the internet people get clever about how they hide themselves and that kind of things. But it's a problem. If I was to say what's the biggest concern for mental health for teens right now, I would say unsupervised access to the internet, unsupervised access to social media would be my biggest thing that I would like to see us as a society to figure out. And I'm very anti-censorship. I don't like censorship. I'm a free speech advocate, but I also have to balance that with this stuff's dangerous for kids, right? And that would be my biggest thing, that like we could probably fix this part of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
And bullies too. That's a great point, Celtic Grandma.
Yeah, exactly. And I've heard some of these kids, and again, I don't work with a lot of kids, but just, being around my son's, different activities and such. And I remember hearing some of these kids, and now, and I put this picture up, and I said, okay. And they're like, and I got 72 likes from it. And I'm like, but what does that get you? They're like, 72 likes.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, and I'm thinking, I'm like, wow, this is really, it's just not good for their mental, if they don't get enough likes, they get very, very depressed. I hate the whole social media thing. I'm just taking like a little piece of it and going on.
Yeah, so let's talk about that piece of it. Because I think that's another part of the equation, right? So our brains are hardwired to crave certain neurotransmitters that make us feel good. So dopamine being the big one that most people are aware of, but there's others: serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA. There's probably hundreds of them. And
I never heard of GABA.
So GABA is, interestingly enough, so I'm gonna oversimplify for the purpose of this stream to kind of explain it. But GABA would be like when you drink more than a couple of drinks of alcohol, that feeling you get is like a high amount of GABA in your body.
Okay.
Um, there's, and that can feel good, of course, like we all know that. But and norepinephrine is be more closer to like adrenaline, right? So most of us, if you're prone to anxiety, right, like adrenaline doesn't feel too good for those of us who are prone to anxiety, but some people do like that feeling, and it's like they seek that out. Dopamine is, and again, I'm oversimplifying here just to kind of help people understand it, but dopamine would be like your overall, just like general happiness neurotransmitter, and serotonin would be like your overall contentment. Any of these and too much cannot be good, and too little cannot be good, right? Like there's a sweet spot for all of this stuff. So when you think about growing up, right? What was your favorite television show growing up?
Wonder Woman.
Okay, good choice. I love that. So how often was Wonder Woman on television?
I
Per
believe
week?
it was once a week.
Once a week, right? Okay, so if you wanted to watch Wonder Woman as a child, what did your parents or your caregivers, what did they say to you? Did you have to do chores and things like that?
Probably.
Okay. And if you misbehaved, could you lose the right to watch Wonder Woman?
Oh, well, not technically that. It was a little more severe than that. They took away TV completely. There was
Okay.
no, yeah.
Okay. So and pretty similar from my household, right? So the moral of the story here is that growing up until the internet, up until the point of like most people were, in the United States were using the internet, we had to work for our dopamine, right? We had to work to get that level of like, this is my reward, right? So think of your dopamine as your reward. And that's so now if you're coming at humanity from like an evolutionary standpoint, we know humans have been around for modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been around for about 150,000 to 300,000 years. They're not sure on the exact date, but somewhere in that ballpark. So let's say it's 150,000 years of evolution, and humans had to, for all that time period, had to work for just a little bit of dopamine, just a little bit. And there was consequences, and you had to challenge yourself to earn that dopamine. And then the internet comes along, and what did we do? We put dopamine on tap, nonstop dopamine. You can look up pictures of kitties misbehaving and cute little birds doing funny things, and pornography if you're into that, and online gambling, and take your pick of whatever it is that makes you happy. And there's no work involved for it. It's just nonstop, like dopamine on tap. Well, what does that do to a person? We don't quite know yet because it's still kind of early. But one of the things that seems to be happening is that people are building up less of an ability to tolerate hard work, less of an ability to tolerate distress. So when you say to little Johnny, okay, Johnny, if you want to play Fortnite tonight or whatever, if you want to watch Mr. Beast on YouTube or whatever, you're going to have to do your chores. They can't even tolerate that, right? Like, because I should be able to watch Mr. Beast whenever I want. It's right there. All I have to do is click a few things, right? What is that going to do for humans long term? I don't know, but I do think that that's a factor for like our level to tolerate a little bit of frustration seems to be going down, and that's probably not a good thing.
I was just going to ask you a question and I lost it. Um, oh, so I've always said, and I guess it's now that we have everything is instant gratification, but the more dopamine we get, I guess, the more we would need, because I always say, like, without bad, you don't know what good is. If you're
Mm-hmm.
relaxing all the time, then when you have a day off from work, it doesn't mean anything because you're always relaxing. That
Mm-hmm.
didn't make a lot of sense. But did you understand where I was going with that?
Yeah. It's natural for us to want to feel good. That's a good thing. And I don't know that we're evolutionarily evolved to be able to understand what feeling good all the time would even look like. I think you're right. Like, if we don't have some level of a sense of life can be hard and struggle is part of life, and we actually learn from struggle. We become better because of struggle. There's a lot of good that comes out of hardships and even tragedies, right? Even every tragedy that we have, something good also usually comes out of that. So again, I don't think that we're meant to be creatures that like are living in this happiness box, that everything's always great. And then probably your level of what you need to feel that dopamine effect probably continues to go up if it's just always available to you.
Right.
We would call that like a tolerance effect. Yeah.
Oh, so Moldy Soldier just wanted to know if you were a doctor or what do you say, naturopath?
Naturopath? Yeah. No, I'm a licensed mental health therapist. My current caseload is mostly first responders, but I've worked with all different age groups and all different. I do have some kids that are like kids of first responders and that kind of thing, so I can speak a little bit to that kind of stuff too. Fibromyalgia. So first of all, you have my complete empathy. Chronic pain is definitely not a fun thing to live with. Yeah, so first of all, it depends on your state and your doctor in terms of like medications, like what you might have access to. I think people in chronic pain have had a hard go of it because of the misuse of pain medication. So it's getting harder and harder for people who genuinely need those medications to be able to access them, which sucks. So number one, I would encourage you to kind of think about if I can't access what I need from my doctor, maybe it's time to look for a new doctor. That being said, outside of the medication realm, then, I would be thinking about like yoga, anything that's going to help you move at a pace that you're comfortable with. And of course, you're going to be thinking about things like meditation and things like that. And unfortunately, meditation can help relieve pain, but like as soon as you stop meditating, it tends to come back pretty quick. So it's good for like trying to get to sleep and that kind of stuff, but it's not going to help you all day long, unfortunately. So I hope that helps a little bit.
If I missed anybody's question, just put it back in caps, because I feel like I missed something, but I can't find it now. I thought there was another question. So if I missed it, just put it back in again.
Yeah, and I saw Moldy Soldier. I saw your thing there too. Yeah, and we need the pharmaceutical industry and the natural remedy folks to do more research on what are our options outside of opioids. Opioids, of course, have tremendous risk potential. I think there's a place for them, but there's definitely some risk of addiction with that. And then we don't want people going to the street to get their medications. That's extremely dangerous. We definitely have a fentanyl crisis going on in this country. We don't need more people adding to that. So it's that part of the industry is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, other than like I go to trainings to learn about some of this stuff. But we need more options outside of the opiates for pain management for sure.
Yeah, I agree. There wasn't so many back in the day. They seems that they learned how to do it later on a little bit.
Moonsprout's got a good question there. So I don't work with that, but I can speak to it a little bit based on research that I've read and people that I've spoken to that have done psilocybin or ketamine. Ketamine is one of those other options for like psychedelic type therapy. So the research is really promising, and if somebody's looking into this, I strongly encourage you to go to a clinic that is doing it. Please don't go to like a backyard place where people are doing this stuff and claiming to be, an internet shaman or something, or they got their, certificate online by paying $50 or whatever. Those places are not safe. Be very, very careful about that kind of thing. Go to like an actual medical clinic where they have doctors and nurses on hand. Right now, insurance isn't paying for it in most circumstances, unfortunately. I do think that could change in the future. And the little bit that I can tell you is that my understanding of why those seem to work is because it creates it creates an opportunity for you to form new neural pathways in your brain. And when we think, right? So any thought, hey, Hudson Valley, it's good to see you. Good to see my brothers. When we think, whatever thought you have, right? So if I was to say coffee, what's your favorite food?
Chocolate.
All right. So what if I told you that I am going to send you in the mail a big box of chocolate from Germany, from does some Dutch chocolate, some Swiss chocolate, and I'm going to send you some of the best chocolates in the world, and I'm going to pay for it at no cost to you. How does that make you feel?
A little leery of why you're doing that, honestly.
All right. Well, let's say it was all legit, and you got this big box of good chocolate from me. Would you be happy?
I would be super happy. Yes.
Okay. What if I was to say to you, oh, hey, I'm sorry to tell you, but you really need to go get another pandemic booster because you're in danger, and we're going to require it. Actually, we're going to require you for you to be able to go in the grocery store, and you're going to have evidence that you did this. How does that make you feel?
Um, like things I can't say on the internet.
Right. So so
And
so
so I,
literally, yeah, so literally our thoughts have power, right? So and I was able to just in like a span of like 3 minutes put two very different thoughts into your head just by talking to you. We do this to ourselves all day long, right? So how much are we saying I'm stupid, I'm fat, I'm unlovable, I don't deserve good things, I'm ugly, nobody loves me, nobody cares about me, right? We say these things to ourselves all day long, and we put this negative stuff. It creates a chemical reaction in your brain when you do this, and it's quick, like really, really quick. And we create these chemical reactions in our brain, and then we're going to feel that in terms of emotions. And then if it continues to go on, we're going to act it out in our behaviors, right? So maybe we get snappy with people, maybe we isolate, maybe we say, I don't feel like feeling like this anymore, so I'm going to reach for the whiskey. All these things that we do, and then we feel bad because we did those things, and we get stuck right back in that cycle. So when you do psychedelics under a clinic based setting, my personal belief is that what we're doing is we're opening up the brain to new neural pathways where we can say things like, I'm no longer a drinker, um, I am not the product of the trauma that I had from my childhood, it wasn't my fault that this person died. We can think differently about these things, and then when we do, under those circumstances where we're creating this like environment where it's creating these neural pathways, if our brain buys into it, then our subconscious buys into it, then it's probably going to make us feel a whole lot better. Now we can do this in other ways without psychedelic therapy. We can do this through EMDR, which I can talk about that in a minute if people don't know what that is. And we can do this through straight old cognitive behavioral therapy, just slower. It can still get you there. It's just a slower path through the muck, right? Whereas the psychedelic therapy is like, we're going to kick in those doors and go running through and changing all of our brain activity, and we're going to do it in less than 24 hours. I'm not opposed to it. I'm just like, that's how I see it, is that it can do a lot of good for a lot of people. There's probably some risks to it that I don't know enough about to speak to, so please be careful and go to a place that does this medically. But the potential for it looks huge. It looks really good, and I think that in the future, hopefully the governments open this up to more people, and the insurance companies say, "Hey, this actually does help. Let's pay for it."
it's funny that you say, about changing your thoughts and how often do you, tell yourself, fat, ugly, blah, blah, blah. And it's because I always tell people, especially when they're having panic attacks, when it's really important how you talk to yourself.
Yeah.
Take away those what ifs, change them into positive. So so what, even if, something like that. But I never went beyond that.
Yeah.
So you saying that is like you just kind of opened up or a light bulb went off, and I was like, wow, like yeah, I probably talk to myself like that all day long.
I think we all do to some extent in our subconscious, right? Like, so when we talk about, like, as you and I are talking here, we're using the prefrontal cortex and our higher brain functions, and we're communicating, and I'm kind of reading the chat as we go, and all that stuff's happening. But then in the subconscious, right, there's layers of our consciousness, and our subconscious, there's all kinds of stuff going on that you don't even know that you're thinking about. You might be thinking about your first boyfriend, and I might be thinking about that girl that I dated when I was 16 years old, and I might be thinking about How am I going to pay my bills next week? And I might be thinking about my cat that's starting to age and he's got some health issues. All that stuff's always going on in the background. We just don't necessarily bring it to the front. And it plays out in our dreams a little bit, and it can play out in other things like flashbacks and things like that, intrusive thoughts and stuff. So what I tell my patients is that think of your brain much like a computer, right? And so there's programs that are running right now as you and I are talking, and then there's programs that are running in the background, like my antivirus stuff and things like that. And the coding is our thoughts. So the coding is where we can decide what the computer's doing. Now, is it easy? No, it's not. I wish it was. You have to work at it. You have to really, really make conscious efforts to recognize that if I was to say, for example, well, look at you, Sarge, you got no hair, you bald, ugly man, right? And I kind of think like that. If I keep doing that and doing that, it's going to make me feel crappy and I'm not going to like myself. So maybe I can't get to the thought of, all right, so you're aging, but you look pretty good for your age, and you're aging with grace, and you're accepting that age is part of humanity and that kind of thing, right? That's a much better thought. But maybe I can't even get there. So all I can do right now is say, I got to stop thinking, man, you're ugly. I got to break that up. I got to somehow recognize that thought's not doing me any good. And in fact, it's actually contributing to my depression and my anxiety and making me feel really bad about myself. So it takes a lot of work. I wish I knew this stuff when I was like, a teenager. We should be teaching this stuff to kids when they're like 5 years old, like how to think about yourself,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking like, I wish I knew all this back in my 20s when I
Yeah.
kind of, went off the deep end.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is really interesting. You're teaching me so much. And
Oh, thanks.
in half an hour, you've opened up my mind so much that I am.
Oh, thank you. Do you want me to talk a little bit about EMDR for people, what that is?
That would be great. That was my next question, and I knew I squirrel out a lot,
Okay.
especially when I'm having anxiety.
Okay. Are you familiar with it? Have you ever had EMDR?
I don't think so. I maybe after you tell me what the initials mean, I might.
Okay, so it's going to sound weird to people when I explain it, but bear with me. There's really good science that backs it. It's evidence based. There's been tons of research on it. It's been around. It started in the 90s with a therapist named Francine Shapiro. And what she was doing, it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And if she says, if I was going to rename this now, if I was going to rebrand it, it would probably be just desensitization and reprocessing. You could drop the eye movement part of it. But what happened was when she started this, she was going for a walk and she was thinking about her own stuff, thinking about her own, problems that she was trying to work out. And as she was doing it, probably gonna have to get close to the camera here to do this. So as she's doing it, her eyes are kind of going back and forth along the road like that, right? So if you've ever seen people when they're dreaming and they're in rapid eye movement, it's doing that same thing. Their eyes are kind of going, it's hard for me to do. There we go. Their eyes are kind of doing one of these deals, right? So she started crying all of a sudden, and then she said to herself, like, I feel better. Something weird just happened. I don't know what it was. So they started studying it with MRIs to try to figure out, like, what is this? What's happening here? So I got some props here for us. So I got a little plastic brain. Okay. So what we do with EMDR is we're stimulating both hemispheres of the brain really fast. Right. And how do you do that? So you can do it with eye movements. You can do it with like shoulder taps. You can have them hold buzzers and it'll buzz like one hand and then the other like that. So there's numerous different ways we can do this. But if you were to put an MRI on, what you would see is that one side of the brain's lighting up and then the other. And the energy in the brain is like literally going back and forth like this really fast. And so it generates a ton of electricity in the brain, generates a lot of movements in the brain. And remember what I was saying about the psychedelics, about creating opportunities for new neural pathways. That's what we're doing. So it's just a different way, in my opinion, of creating opportunities for new neural pathways. So when we do this, then we can desensitize to some old traumas. We can change some faulty thinking. We can insert preferred cognitions, preferred thoughts with events. And I'll give you an example of this. We can recall memories with much more detail because we're lighting up all the neural pathways like crazy. And the I've seen people get tremendous results from this. People with really severe trauma have their like nightmares go down to zero, flashbacks go down to zero, because we're changing how the brain thinks about those traumas, right? So let me give an example, and I'm going to make something up here. So I work with first responders. If I had, for example, a firefighter who responded to a house fire, and in the process of that house fire, they were going in and out and trying to get the people out because there was people trapped inside. And maybe in the process of that, they pull out a child, but the child's dead. They're burned really bad. Well, that's a pretty bad trauma for anybody, right? And maybe let's say that that firefighter has a child at home of the same age. Well, there's a pretty good chance then that that might get sticky for them. Sticky being like they're gonna hang on to that a little bit. So let's say a couple weeks go by and they're trying to deal with this, but they're getting nightmares and they're getting flashbacks and they're getting agitated at home, and then now they don't want to go out to dinner with their family, and they might be drinking a little bit more because they're trying to deal with all this crap. And then the next thing you know, they're coming in and they're seeing me and they're like, I don't know what happened. I'm in trouble at work. My wife is ready to leave me. My kids don't want to talk to me. I'm unhappy all the time. I can't sleep. I'm drinking 12 beers a night, right? Like all this stuff has now piled up on them. Well, we're going to work on that. And what we're going to do is I'm trying to get them to a place where we can do some of this EMDR. And we might look at this scene and say, okay, what happened when you were at this scene and you were pulling this kid out? What were the thoughts that was going through your mind? What was the thoughts afterwards in the days that followed that? And he might say, I felt like it was my fault. If we had driven a little faster, maybe we would have gotten there in time. If we had taken a left instead of gotten into that intersection where it was too crowded, maybe we would have gotten there a minute earlier, right? And they're kind of playing this game in their head where they're, what if, what if, what if? Well, I can tell you right now, the what if game, you and I were talking about this backstage, the what if game's never good for us, right? Like that's only going to get you into trouble. And the brain's going to now start wrestling with that, and it's going to start playing out these scenarios. And so instead of taking that memory and turning it into a really awful bad memory and just putting it away, it's fighting with it now, and it's trying to resolve it, and it's trying to get to what we call adaptive resolution. But it's playing out all these different scenarios. So now you're getting nightmares. So now you're getting flashbacks, and now it's intruding on your mind. And every time you drive by that area, all you can think about is that house and that little girl. And so we're going to kind of desensitize to that by running through it several times. We're just going to keep going through that memory, and it's painful. This part of it's hard, but we're going to run through it. We're going to run through it, but you're safe because you're in my office, and we're going to check in every 15 seconds and see how you're doing. Breathe. I need you to breathe. Look at me. Look around the room. What are you seeing, right? Like you're here. You're not at the fire. And then once we've desensitized to it so it's not so intense for them, now we're going to start to say, okay, what is the reality that you could have changed this situation, right? And the reality is probably zero. So, and I'm just using that particular example, probably zero. You going to take a different way to that fire, you don't know that you might have hit a car on that way. You don't know that that might have taken longer. You don't know that there's all kinds of things that contradict those what ifs. And so now we got to put in a different cognition. So maybe it's something like, we did the best that we could. We were professional. We used every available resource to us. We acted as a team. We were considerate to the family and what they were going through. And unfortunately, sometimes bad things happen and we can't always prevent it. So if we can get your brain to buy into that through that, that stimulation thing, then your brain's going to pair. It's going to take that trauma and the old memory will say, I'm going to use some props here for everybody. So we'll say, there's your brain with the trauma. And we've got this like old memory. It's green screen's kind of screwing with it. So we say we got that old memory as a little sticker there. And then so with your therapist, you're going to try to see if we can break that up. And then we're going to put a new memory on there, which is we did the best that we could. We were professional. We used every resource available to us, but unfortunately, it's just a bad thing that we couldn't prevent. If your brain buys that and it takes that and attaches it to the new memory, pretty good chance that your symptoms are going to go way down. They might go away altogether. So that's EMDR. It's a little bit more complicated than your average therapy. We have to go to very specialized training for that, and it's very intense and it's expensive. But I will say it's a game changer. I've done more great work with people who had trauma with that than with cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's quicker too, so people don't have to be in therapy as long and like fighting with all their symptoms and stuff. Tends to get them there a lot quicker.
You know what? I put my son through a therapy like that when he
Okay.
was something like that. I don't know how it was called brain balance. He had ADHD and he couldn't sit in school, and they kept putting him on medications. I hate medications.
Yeah.
I want them off. So it actually had just started when he was, because this is for my older one, and he was maybe 12ish at the time. So we're talking almost 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and it was actually my chiropractor, who was also a neurologist,
Mm-hmm.
had started this, and he wrote books on it and blah blah blah, and it was definitely not covered by insurance, but it definitely helped him. The only thing that we couldn't get, because one of the things was, because usually when they did it when they were younger, so they could
Mm-hmm.
control what they ate, and he was like, stay away from preservatives, food dyes, all
Yeah.
of this stuff. I couldn't do that with him, because you ate one Dorito and you threw the whole thing off. And when he's in junior high school, or middle school as they call it now, I guess I'm dating myself, the diet just went out the window. But it was great because there was no drugs, it wasn't interactive. I'm like, what's the worst case scenario? I lose my money, which would have sucked. But of
Mm-hmm.
course I'm going to try everything I can to get him off medication. But it sounds very similar to what you're talking about. They did the
Mm-hmm.
beeps, they did the tapping, they did all this stuff. And it didn't cure him, but it definitely, because he had some autistic tendencies.
Okay.
Uh, they say head tilt. He didn't recognize facial expression sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and there was one other thing, I can't remember what it was, but it cured him of all that. The ADHD, he got through school.
Mm-hmm.
Without, before he did this, they were like, we're not even going to let him in his classroom if you don't medicate him. And I was like, I don't want to keep doing this. Like, this is not for us.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, I mean, it doesn't sound as intense as what you're talking about, but it definitely helped.
Yeah, and insurance should pay for it in most cases now, especially if you're seeing somebody who's like a licensed therapist. They should pay for it if you've got some kind of mental health coverage on your thing, because it's considered an evidence-based practice at this point. It's been around for a long time now. I could see maybe in the beginning it there might have been some questions about that, but just most insurance, actually the insurance companies like it because it tends to lead to less sessions and less payout for them basically.
Okay.
Uh, um, dealing with first responders such as law enforcement, how do you get around reporting issues that may happen during therapy? Okay, so confidentiality and HIPAA laws. Well, let me say what I'm saying to you now. HIPAA laws are actually being looked at and are probably about to undergo some major changes if that's not already in place. But I'll tell you how they speak as of right now from um, from how it's used in practice. So when you go to your therapist, generally speaking, everything you talk about is confidential. There is a few exceptions. So the exceptions to that are if you tell your therapist about a child being abused or an elderly person being abused or a disabled person being abused, they are obligated by law to report that. And if they don't, they can get themselves into some hot water. So that's one of the exceptions. Another one would be obviously, if you sign a piece of paper that says, I want you to communicate with my primary care physician or my spouse or something like that, we would call that a release of information or an authorization to release information. That is another exception. If the therapist feels that you are in immediate danger to hurt yourself or hurt somebody else, they are probably going to do what they need to do to try to prevent that. So that may mean in some cases that if they're afraid that you're going to go home and hurt yourself and you can't contract for safety and you're not willing to go get some voluntary help, they can, in I believe in all 50 states, they can hospitalize you against your will. I can come back to that in a minute if people have questions about that, and I have had to do that. But generally speaking, I'm not going to speak for everybody. I try to avoid that. If there's any other way to avoid it, I will do everything I can to avoid taking somebody's rights away. If you get hurt on their property, they can break confidentiality to the extent needed to get you help. And the other another big one is if your record gets subpoenaed by a judge, they mental health is unable to block a judge's subpoena. Now, I can tell you I've only seen that happen a couple times. If in the times that I've seen it, it's generally been when like two parents are fighting over custody and one's trying to paint the other one as like this person's not safe for parenting or something stupid like that. That's when I've seen that one come into play. Not to say that it couldn't happen in other situations, but that's when I've seen it happen. So, does that answer your question? Because like as a therapist, I can tell you I've heard just about anything you can possibly imagine, from murders to where bodies were buried to um, crazy fetishes that people have that I can't even if I could tell you, I wouldn't even know how to describe it. Yeah, I mean, your stuff should be safe with a therapist, barring those exceptions that I just described.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything else.
Celtic Grandma said it right. Mandated reporters. That's right.
I'm actually a mandated reporter, being that I work for that I did work for social services. I'm
Gotcha.
still in the county, but yeah. And I don't know. I don't actually know if I still am obligated to, because I'm not in that same position I am, but I would treat it as such. I mean,
Yeah.
If I saw a kid getting hurt, I don't care if I'm a mandatory reporter or not. That's, something I'm going to report.
The hard part is there's gray area, right? And it's subjective to cultural issues. It's subjective to, parenting styles and things like that, right? So, generally speaking, I don't consider it a spanking to be child abuse. But of course, it depends on how hard, right? Like, are you, pulling out the belt
different story.
and beating them to the point where they have red marks on their buttocks for a week? I've got a problem with that. That's and it's not effective anyways. Once you do something like that, it's you may say, oh, I got the crap beat out of me, and well, yeah, I get it. Like I grew up too in the 70s and 80s. I get it, but there's other options now that are much better than that can get you the same result. If you don't want your kid to act up and be disrespectful, there's definitely better options than beating the crap out of them.
Right. I'm sorry, hold on just 1 second.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah. Thanks. I don't have a light bulb in there. I saw your text. I don't have a light bulb in there, but I will make sure that that next time I have it. I didn't realize how dark it was in here.
There's they have mini ring lights, which you basically you pin over your camera, and those work really good, by the way. And they're pretty cheap. Like, they're usually under $15.
Oh, okay. I'll have to see. My camera's on my laptop, so whatever camera I'm using in my laptop is literally the only camera I have. Somebody gave me
you could pin it right over that.
Okay.
Yeah, they're really cool. Do people want me to talk about medications at all, and medications with kids and those kind of issues? Because I know that's always kind of a hot topic.
Let's see.
What do you all think? Do you want me to speak to that?
It's because the chat is 30 seconds behind. Moonsprout says yes.
Okay. So here's what I would say. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about medications. I would say, first of all, when you go to see a therapist, you need to remember, if they're working on a team that has a psychiatrist, and some places will mandate, okay, you have to be assessed by a psychiatrist as well. That's within their rights to have their own policies, that kind of thing. But you also have rights too, and you don't have to put anything in your body that you don't want to. And that's, most of us in the field will support that. There's a few diagnoses that I would say, my personal opinion is very, very strongly, that these diagnoses are not easily treated without medication. So I'm talking about schizophrenia and things like that, where if you want to give your loved one the best chance at having a decent life with something as debilitating as schizophrenia, If you're going to ask my opinion, I would say they probably need to be on medications. For most other stuff, most people can do therapy, and it's going to get you where you want to be. The medications might give you a little bit of a biochemical edge in getting there, but then you have to weigh that against the side effects and the possible withdrawals if later on you want to come off of them and that kind of stuff. As far as for kids, if I would say to parents, if you are going to medicate your kids, make sure you are, if it's something like a stimulant for school or something like that, which is very common, make sure you are talking to them about, can my child come off of this during the summer or on weekends, because some medications that's not recommended. So make sure talk to your doctor or talk to the nurse, whoever's your primary contact there. And the SSRIs, like your antidepressants and things like that, those definitely get more complicated. And there's black box warnings and things like that about the dangers of those kind of medications with adolescents. However, I will say in my experience that at least in every single case that I've read, that there was an adolescent who committed self-harm, or they did something terrible like go into a school and cause a problem with a massacre or something like that. In every single one of those cases, that kid that I know of, that kid was not taking their medications correctly. So it wasn't so much that they were taking an SSRI that put them at risk, but they were taking an SSRI sporadically, taking it here, skip 3 days. Maybe I'll take 2 today. Maybe I won't take it again tomorrow. Maybe I'll take 3 in the morning. And they're just messing around with it. Well, you can't do that with those medications. They literally affect your neurotransmitters in your brain. And if you're not going to take it correctly, or if your kid's not going to take it correctly, then you need to be very, very careful about using those medications. If you are going to do it, and I've seen kids get a lot of benefit from this sometimes. So if you're gonna have your kid take an SSRI, make sure they're taking it every day at the same time, the way that they're supposed to, and don't screw around with that. It's too scary. When there's bad outcomes, it's always because, in my opinion, it's always because the kid wasn't taking it correctly.
It's good to know.
Oh, okay, Ed, I see your question. Yeah. Yeah, let me circle back to that and see if anybody has other questions about the medications. So, that is a huge factor, stigma and on the roof naked. Let's come back to that one. So law enforcement and I would say veterans and firefighters and also fall into this category, right? So the there is a stigma that if I'm in one of those jobs, and some other jobs as well, pilots too, pistol packing pilot and I were talking about this as well, that if I seek treatment, that I could lose my job. And historically, maybe that's been true in some cases. I do think it's getting better. I think that there's more acceptance, not so much with the pilots. We got some work we got to do there, but with law enforcement and with firefighters and veterans, there is more acceptance of that. We can't put these people in these situations where they're exposed to trauma after trauma after trauma and expect that they're not going to have some possible side effects of that work, right? So it's becoming more okay for these groups to say, I want to go and get help. Now, that being said, if you want to keep it personal and private, your therapist should do that. There's no reason why they should in most cases, there's no reason why they should have to inform your employer. And if you're really worried about it and you really want that privacy, we were talking about this on Pistol Packing Pilot stream. Another option, it's going to cost out of pocket, unfortunately, but you could pay somebody in the private practice world cash, not use your insurance, and ask them to keep any records of it to a bare minimum, because privacy is very important to you. And most private practices will do that, but you're taking your insurance out of the equation, so it's going to be out of pocket.
That's
What was
great.
yeah, I mean, it's number one, the biggest thing in the long term is we got to continue to combat the stigma. And that takes, you need people in those worlds, pilots, police officers, firefighters, veterans. We need people in leadership roles to make it normal, to make it okay, right? So when we have a fire chief or a captain who says, yeah, I go and talk to a therapist and Tom's helped me out a lot, right? That actually can make a tremendous difference in terms of all the people working for them suddenly were like, oh, so it's okay. I can actually go and get help and it's normal. And, the whole suck it up buttercup culture is doing a great disservice to these people, right? Like 30 years of pulling bodies out of fires, 30 years of doing CPR on an infant, 30 years of responding to gunshots, right? Like how does that not take a toll on somebody? It's gonna be hard. It's gonna be really hard for somebody to make it through all that without picking up some residual stuff themselves.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't. It takes a certain type of personality. I could never do it. I
Yeah.
would. I would fall apart the first time something bad happened. I would. That would be the end of it. So I get
You're
a lot
probably
of.
more resilient than you think. You're
Mhm.
probably more resilient than you think. And
I
I
mean,
probably should include ER nurses in that group as well.
you made up a scenario before, and I'm crying for
Yeah.
this made up scenario. So
Yeah.
probably not.
Yeah, I know, an emergency, what's going to happen is our fight, flight, freeze is going to kick in. And, we don't know which of those is going to kick in unless you've trained. Right. So, this is why they go to, police academy. And this is why veterans go to basic training and stuff, right? Because they have to train out the flight and the freeze. They have to be able to fight. So, for the average person who doesn't do that, we don't really know, right? It's hard coded in your DNA. What the way you react to a situation is going to be different than the way I react to a situation. Um, but I do think that when push comes to shove, most people have that superpower within them that, like, if there was a fire next door to me and I'm the first person there and I know I got a chance to get in and get somebody out, I'd like to think I'm going to do my best to get not freeze, and I'm going to get in and get somebody out. But truly, because I don't work in that world, I don't know, right? Like, you don't know until it happens.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of do that in my own brain though, if that makes sense. I don't know if other
Yeah.
people do this or not, but I'm almost like wargaming like 72 different scenarios in my head, which I mean, it's probably the wrong word, but I think you understand what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
What if this happened? What would I do? What if this happened? What would I do? And I do this all day long with
Mhm.
so many different things. Like literally, if I go to the store, what if my car broke down on the way there?
Mhm.
What would I do? Just simple things. And I'm doing this all day long, which is probably why I'm exhausted all the time because my brain's like, can you please stop?
So I'm an anxious thinker as well. I've gotten much better at handling that, but exactly what you're describing, like, I'm sure everybody in chat who's got a little bit of anxiety is like, "Yep, me too." Like, we do that. We game the scenarios in our head of like, okay, if I go in this grocery store and there's an active shooter, what am I going to do, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's part of our survival mechanisms and whatnot. It can be difficult to deal with, like when your brain's always thinking like that. It can be hard to shut it down, especially at nighttime when we're trying to sleep and that kind of thing. But yeah, anxious thinking in some ways is also a superpower because you're kind of thinking of situations and mentally training of like, if this happens, this is where I'm going, this is what I'm going to do, this exit over here is going to be where I'm going to go. If I can't get there, then I'm going over here, that kind of thing.
So I have a superpower, is what you're saying.
I would say it is. I think so. I think that, and just like with, if you read comics, like most of the superpowers, like we also, there's weaknesses that go along with that, right? Like, so you get a gift in one area, but it also can be sometimes hard to deal with, right?
Yeah, a gift
Yeah.
and a curse. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
So I don't have one of those, like, what do they call it, eidetic memories or whatever, but I have friends who do, and they say it's a curse. Like they can remember hundreds of phone numbers and things like that. And I always say, wow, that's really impressive. And they're like, it's actually a curse because I can't shut it off. It's hard to get stuff out of my head.
that's funny. I remember phone numbers. It's from 1962. I remember phone numbers.
Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
pretty impressive.
I I remember my very first phone, and I can't. It's so funny that you say that because
Yeah.
anything with numbers, once I dial it once, it's stuck in my head forever, and I can't get
Wow.
rid of it.
Huh.
Yeah, and unless you change it. If you tell me I've changed my number and this is my new number, and
Yeah.
I now cannot remember the old one that I've
Oh
known
no.
for 12 years, but
Okay.
I'll remember the new one. It's almost like my brain deletes it and
Huh.
copies over it. It's very strange.
That's pretty cool.
Um, yeah, it's weird. It doesn't do me any good anymore because everybody's got, their phone in their hand and, all of the numbers. It worked great back in the day because, you had to dial everything. Because
Mhm,
I'm old and you had to dial every phone number that
mhm.
sometimes on a rotary phone.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a factor in it that the phones were different. I also think like I've gotten pretty sloppy about directions. Like I used to be really good, not just like my internal compass, but being able to like remember where things are. But now with GPS, and I'm not just talking about like my area around me where you should know like where your bank is and your grocery, but I mean like even like beyond that, back in the day, I probably could have driven, across several states without having to look at directions, but that's gone. Yeah, and I think that's GPS
Oh,
that's done that to me.
right. Yeah. No, I've never had a good sense of direction.
Somebody had
That
asked about the psychotropic medications. Um, so first of all, when you're talking about like stuff that would be prescribed for somebody with like schizophrenia and things like that, the average person, a neurotypical person, is they're not ever going to be prescribed those things, and I don't even know what it would do to you if you did, if if it would make you sick or have some kind of really bad reaction to it. Those are for people who have like really significant impairments in how their brain is working. And now, as far as like other medications, there's always risks, right? So, with a lot of the benzodiazepine classes, there is a risk of addiction with that stuff, just like with the opiates. And the person has to weigh the pros and cons of that. Like, is this, does the risk outweigh the potential benefit? And, what are my other options and that kind of thing. I talked about with the SSRIs, you have to take the SSRIs every day. And if you ever want to come off of them, you have to talk to your doctor in a way so that you can do it safely and taper down slowly and safely. So there's always risks. People have to weigh for themselves what they're willing to tolerate, right? And how much it's going to be beneficial for them. And that's gonna vary from person to person. So I don't mind sharing this because I shared it on Pistol Packing Pilots channel the other night. Years ago, I took Cymbalta when my mother died. I was going through a pretty bad period myself, and Cymbalta is a antidepressant. And I took it for close to a year until I started to feel like I don't know that I really need this anymore. I'm healing okay from this grief, and I'm not sad every day, and that kind of thing. And so I started to talk to my doctor, and we came up with a plan to slowly and safely taper me down off of this. And we did that over the course of like 2 months. And I still got bad withdrawal from it. I still had some bad side effects coming off of it. And that lasted for another maybe 6 weeks before I felt like my brain was finally back to where it needs to be. Um, Not everybody's going to go through that because everybody's brain chemistry is different. But for me personally, I will never go on that medication again, even though it did help me at the time when I was grieving. For me, the withdrawal coming off of it, I would remember that and not it's not worth it for me. Now, am I saying I would never take an antidepressant again? No. I probably, if I needed it, I would probably try a different one. But I know that medication was not easy for me to come off of.
I had a similar issue with Zoloft back again. We're talking like 30 years ago here. I had some really, and I swear it's what actually caused my vertigo.
Mm,
'Cause when I was coming off of it, I was getting dizzy spells from, I guess, coming off of it too fast because you had to wean and wean and wean off of it. And I had horrible side effects when they put me on the top dosage, so they had to come down to a less. I think it was like 200, whatever it was, 200 milligrams, kilograms, whatever
mm,
the grams are for that. And they had to like bring me down to 150 to where I wasn't having wicked side effects. But then when
mhm,
I wanted to come off after about 2 years or so, I was weaning off, and I just kept getting these wicked dizzy spells,
Yeah.
and everything was, and I never really got rid of it. And I swear it's what
Yeah.
caused the vertigo that I have now. Even though I know they say it comes from my ears, I think that knocked him out of initially and never put him back
Yeah.
right.
Kind of activated it for you.
Yeah, that's what I think. So I'm not a big. I will do anything I can to avoid medication.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I mean, that's me personally. I mean, I know other
Yeah.
people have great success with it. It's just, it's not me. I don't like it. My body doesn't like anything foreign, like absolutely nothing.
Yeah. So so again, to go back to what we were saying earlier in the stream here, if you or your loved one are going in for therapy, remember that it's your body. You get to decide what you're willing to put in your body or not, and please be your best advocate for yourself. And if you don't feel like you want to try certain medication or medications at all, and you just want to do therapy, you're going to have to be your advocate and say, well, thank you for telling me about that option, but I'm choosing not to take that, and I would like to just do therapy. And I have, I would say probably 60, somewhere maybe 65% of my patients do just therapy only, and they do great. They do, I have a really high success rate for my patients. So you can, in a lot of cases, just do therapy. But it's individual. I don't want to judge anybody who chooses to go the route of like they need that little help from medication too, and they're willing to take those risks of side effects and things like that. I totally understand. Like I said, I took some Balta myself. I was going through a tough time, and it did help me at that time. It helped me.
Right. Well, yeah. When I was taking the medication, I needed it to survive.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, the best therapy I think I ever had was when I went strictly for, people who dealt with panic. I wanted somebody. I didn't want just somebody who dealt with everything. And they said, oh, we want to do the people I had. It was called TARAP, and
Mhm.
stood for Territorial Apprehension, which they were always like, it's the worst name in the world because you don't know what it means. They
But it was
strict
helpful.
they strictly dealt with panic attacks and anxiety. They
Good.
didn't tell me, because I hated the fact that they used to tell me, well, you're depressed. Of course I'm depressed. I'm afraid to go outside. So
Yeah.
yes, I'm depressed. Deal with my anxiety, and then my depression will go away. And I was right. When my anxiety went away, so did my depression. I didn't need all
Sure.
the loads of medication. I feel like they're too quick to medicate a
Yeah.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah. I agree with that. I
my
agree with that.
opinion.
Yeah. Um, So, just as an interesting side note, so you and I both have that what I would call the anxious mind. Do you know that there's like a small percentage of people that don't have like an internal voice, like an internal dialogue?
Really?
Yeah, it's hard to understand, isn't it? Like, so
How,
you and I, we have this voice that like we're constantly talking to in our mind. It's us, it's our voice, right? But like, like, oh, I probably should go to the store, and yeah, I got to take care of this, and and there's actually people that don't have that, and it's like at all, and it's really hard for me to comprehend that.
wow.
Yeah,
How do
I
they
don't know.
function?
I
Like,
don't know.
what tells them to, like, get up and eat? Or
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it just like it's kind of instinctual, but also like living so close to the moment, maybe, right? So maybe they do have that thought, but it's so close to the action that there's no lag time, right? Like, whereas you and I are going to think about something before we do it.
right.
That's my guess. I don't know. It's really hard for me to understand because I do have an internal dialogue that I have with myself.
Well, sometimes I have five or six that are arguing with each other, but
Yeah, multiple tabs are open in that computer, exactly.
yep, too many tabs are open and it's slowing down the computer.
Yeah.
Well,
Did we have any
now,
other questions come through?
I did. I've recently recovered. Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, I had agoraphobia for a while. It's rough. I'm so happy you overcame that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and faith can be such a huge factor in people's healing and recovery too, right? So,
Mhm.
you probably have heard that people of faith tend to heal faster, and in my experience, anecdotally, I believe that is true. It's
I do.
not to say that, like, for those of you out there who might be atheist or agnostic, that you can't heal. No, you can. But in my observation, people of faith do heal faster.
It's yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always say that, because a lot of people say what's helped them most is pray, and I always say yes. If you are a praying person,
Mhm.
absolutely, 100% do it. But I would never, whatever helps you.
That's
But
right.
everybody, is separate, has different beliefs, so whatever helps you. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and
I mean,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say this was awesome. You've really taught me a lot in the hour that we've been on. Like
Oh,
it's
my pleasure. My pleasure. I love getting the word out and helping people. That's what it's all about, you know. So for I know you do a lot of kind of preparedness stuff too, right? So one thing that people can do, I'll throw out a couple recommendations stuff for people for follow up. So one thing I do recommend for anybody who's in the preparedness community is that we should all be getting training on mental health first aid. So you'll have to look in your area, you Google your area and then mental health first aid, and try to find if there's classes near you. There are a lot of times they're offered through a church and things like that. And they will teach you the very basics of helping other people, because if we continue to encounter difficult things in this world, and I think most people would say that that's going to happen, like things aren't getting better, they're getting worse. And so there's going to be there's going to be storms, more war, more recession, more of all of it, more of all the good fun stuff. There's going to be more of it. And so you can be in a position, especially in a world where we have so few people who are licensed therapists, to be able to be help with some of that stuff. It's kind of basic, but it definitely does help. So mental health first aid, take the classes if you can get it. It's usually free. A couple good books to recommend for people would be um, for men with depression. There's a book called "I Don't Want to Talk About It," which is really strongly recommended. The depression looks different in men, and the field is this is a big passion of mine. The field is not caught up with that yet. We have to continue, and this is something that I take very seriously. We need to get people to increase awareness of that depression looks different in men. It manifests differently in men. So that's a good one. It's called I Don't Want to Talk About It. Um, Another good one for people with trauma is The Body Keeps the Score. Highly recommend that one. And for somebody who's in therapy that is maybe thinking about doing EMDR or is currently working with an EMDR therapist, I would recommend Getting Past Your Past. All three of those books are really, really good.
You had them linked on your
I did.
PSTD video,
Yep.
correct? I
Yep.
put that video on my community page. So if
Okay,
anybody
cool.
wants them and wants the links, if you go to my community page, click that video. By the way, it was an excellent video. So
Thank
anybody
you.
who knows anybody or has PSTD, uh, did I get the initials right?
PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder.
I have to think about it before I get the initials correct. But check out that video. As I said, I linked it on my community page. It was awesome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And well, make sure you guys go and check out Prepping with Charge. He does some awesome videos. Not usually about this, but once in a while, I guess we'll get one of them.
Yep, absolutely. I will continue to talk about it as it relates to prepping, because if things get as bad as I think they're going to get, mental health is going to get much, much worse than what it already is. If we get ourselves into another war, which not to get too far down rabbit holes today, but another war with a big nation like China or something like that, it's going to be a bad scene. There's going to be a lot of people depressed. There's going to be a lot of trauma. There's going to be a lot of anxiety, all of the above. But even like a recession does it. We have self-harm rates are really high in the last 3 years, because contrary to what the pretty faces on TV say, we are in a recession. The pandemic caused a lot of depression for people. People got really depressed being locked down or out of work or working from home, things like that. So it's something that is going to continue to be an important part of preparedness, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the pandemic really catered to people with anxiety and depression. It just,
Yeah.
it isolated people. It just, I have a really good friend who is prone to be an introvert. And this pandemic just, I mean, she rarely comes out of the house now,
Yeah.
only when necessary at this point. And I'm like, the whole pandemic fed into that and just made it
It
grow
did.
so horribly.
It's so sad. Yeah, I've got friends who developed. We were talking about agoraphobia before, which is basically like fear of being out in social places and wanting to isolate in your own home. I had a friend who basically developed that during the pandemic, and just in the last year or so is starting to kind of come out of that. It was really sad to see it.
Yeah, it's horrible. But I loved this. So maybe one day you'll come back and be a guest again.
Absolutely.
That would be
Definitely. Let's do it. We'll do it.
awesome. Uh, so yeah, so you guys make sure you check out his channel, awesome channel, and then I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. Thanks everybody so much for being here, and thank you, Sarge.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you, Chad. Great questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions tonight. All right, you guys all have a wonderful night.
Bye, everybody.